Tracy with Steel Thistle Artistry, and I've had a lot of people ask me about number one, freezer paper, and number two, how I get alcohol ink to do anything other than be abstract. And when we talk about freezer paper, I learned that some countries don't have it, but this is what it is. It's this 150-foot roll cost me like $8. It's 18 inches wide, and it's just thin paper with plastic on one side, and you use it to protect your food from freezer burn. I know a lot of people can find it in quilting shops too. They use it to iron on stencils and whatnot on the fabric because it'll stick but lightly and it won't leave a residue behind like wax paper would, which you do not want to use, by the way. Wax paper is not the same. The alcohol will just eat the wax and you'll be disappointed. So the other thing with freezer paper that you have to be aware of, well, there's a couple things. It's thin, so you've got to handle it with care after you've got your painting on there, because if you buckle it, you'll wind up with a crease that you can see. It'll even flake off some of the color if you don't keep it flat. So I recommend at least taping it to like a piece of cardboard or something when you're done before you start spraying it with the varnish to seal it. The good and bad thing about freezer paper is on the back side, it will hold onto ink like no other. So if you're looking for, say, you want to have a background or an outline on something, and you want that hard line, you're looking for like a stained glass effect, and you want those hard lines, and you don't want them to mix, you can, on the back, the non-shiny side of the paper, you can draw your outline, and then when you flip it over, you can see it through the wax. So if you don't want hard lines that you cannot move and get rid of, when you have your freezer paper on whatever surface you're working on, you're going to want to tape it down just because it curls. You know, it's on a roll, it's going to want to curl. But you need to also seal the edges, and I'm going to show you why here. I purposefully left an edge open on here, and show you what happens if you get ink that runs underneath. Takes my hair dryer, blow it around a little bit, blow it up and over. Now it's underneath there, and it's kind of, it'll look like an oil spot almost. When I go to take that color off, you know, freezer paper will always let go of the color on the top. On the bottom side, I don't know if you can see this, it's stained and you can't pick that up. So you don't want that, because whatever you put on top is going to be darker underneath there. So it's not a great effect. I don't like it. So if I'm going to be blowing any ink around, I always tape down the sides all the way. Plus it keeps the inks from ruining your drawing board or whatever you happen to be using. Now there's 1,000,001 tutorials out there about you know, how to make wispy effects and really awesome background stuff, which I love. But there's 1,000,000 ones of those. You don't need me to go back over that. When I draw my focal point for my paintings, you know, like I do animals a lot, so you know, a rabbit, a horse, whatever. I'll sketch it out on a piece of paper, and then I don't know if you can see it or not, but I've done some other stuff underneath, and you can kind of see it through it. So it's really thin, and you put it on a window, and you can trace stuff onto it really, really easy. So I recommend putting sketching out on another type of paper, you know, like thin printer paper, that sort of thing would be good. That way you don't scratch up the plastic, because if you're sketching and erasing on the plastic, you're going to eat through the plastic eventually. It's not that thick. So I always draw it out on another piece of paper, and then I put it underneath, and I'll trace it onto here. Then I have my background on there with a light, you know, just regular old number 2 pencil. So I have my focal point, and I'll say, you know, this is it. And then, I love these markers, by the way. What I will do to kind of give it depth and have the background coming out away from it is I will take my blending solution and put it down, you know, and start at the line And don't be fussed, don't worry about it. That's why you'll use pencil instead of marker like I did, because then you won't lose the line. But you want it to kind of overlap, and I use this dryer on low so I can blend it a little bit. And it takes a few times. Don't be discouraged if it's not, wispy on your first time, especially since it really, how humid it is, how hot it is, all these things factor into how it's going to behave on any given day, even from the same place, same materials. But I just keep feathering on out. That back and forth is what, gets away from that edge for you. And I just keep trying to get most of it off of, my center. Some of it's not going to matter, you're going to come back and be able to pick it up, but so just going back and forth is how you kind of blend it out. And so if I'm looking for a more dynamic, like it's a happy splash, active kind of thing, I'm going to use the blow dryer on high. If I'm wanting a little bit more control, then, I'll use a straw. There's a lot of ways you can do that, and like I said, there's 1,000,001 tutorials about that. Freezing canned air, airbrush, that sort of stuff, it's going to move faster, and when you have faster, you're going to have more quick, hard lines drawn out. Another thing when you're blending is if you don't want it to pick its own path, and it'll usually avoid areas like this too. If you don't put alcohol on that, it'll kind of be like that's a resist. It won't go over that very well. It'll take a lot of buildup to go over. But if you want this to not just go in a straight line, you've got to give it a path to go to. So you got to put some in front of it so it'll blend out and not just be this line of color. And see, that gave me a fade, even with a couple hard edges, but it faded it out really well because I gave it a puddle of alcohol to go into. So that's another thing to think about. And to get rid of those hard lines like that, you got to put alcohol on it and then just kind of move it back and forth, and it'll blend out that hard line. So depending on what effect you're looking for with your backgrounds, is what you'll use to blend. There's 1,000,001 things. None of them are the right answer for everyone all the time. So when you're putting down your inks, you get your brush and you're gonna paint all these detail lines, like you can with acrylic or even watercolor somewhat. So put your ink down and you're like, oh yay, here, I'm gonna this out and I'm gonna do these petals. Now, when it was drier, or when it was wetter, see how these all blend together. And as it gets drier, they don't move as much. So if you want to put it down with fine lines to start with, let your ink dry a second or two. It doesn't take long, it's alcohol, so it's not like you have to wait infinitely. But then you can start getting your small lines. Here, I'll zoom this in. Okay. Now if it's wet, when you're moving your brush, your strokes aren't going to show up. It's just all going to pool together. So depending on what look you're looking for, that's a good thing or a bad thing. But see how all the strokes are just kind of blending together and disappearing, and you've got this blob. So you don't like that. You're like, oh gosh, I screwed it up, it's too wet. No big deal. You can either wipe your brush off on a paper towel or on the side of the ink well, and then just keep coming back in. And it's going to erase them if it's wet. And you're going to have that line of white from the alcohol actually picking ink up, which is fun. But that little bit of drifting is what gives it its own edge, so you're kind of outlining everything, which gives it some depth, and is part of what I really love about it. But how much of your brush strokes show up depends on how much moisture, or well, I guess alcohol, is in your ink and on your brush And excuse the messes, I have a raccoon tearing up my craft room because he loves to. So you can do that and pull them out. You know, the size of your brush and everything matters too. Just like with acrylics, just if you want it wet, if you want a watercolor look, you want everything to blend together, go wet. If you want lines and texture, go dry. And don't be afraid to put a couple drops on your palette and let it, you know, dry. If you wait too long, you're like, oh crap, it's dried out. I didn't get anything used. It's totally dry. What do? I've got this wasted ink. This ink is expensive. Oh my gosh. And I was kind of having a panic about that when I first started. And yeah, they're never actually beyond use as long as you've got some rubbing alcohol. You put it on there and pick it up and there you go. It's wet all over again. So, you know, you'll figure out for your place, your humidity, you know, your temperatures and stuff, how long it's going to take the inks to dry out on you. And you go from there. And if you wait too long and it's too dry, put a little bit of alcohol. If you didn't wait long enough and it's too wet and it blends all together, let it dry a little bit and go back in. This is infinitely erasable. It's color that you can erase. That's why I love it. Also, I really suck at planning. So I should be planning out and I should go from light to dark and everything else. But the only planning I ever managed to actually get done on my paintings is the background. I always do the background first. And that gives that depth that I like. Plus, when you're blowing it around with the hairdryer, if that's the way you're going to do your background, it's hard to control it and it's going to run over your lines. It's not the end of the world if it runs over your lines because, well, see, I'll show you. I'll do a different color. It ran over your lines. Doggone it, you know. If you put your line on with pencil, it won't even matter that your line's covered up because your line is going to come back out. So all you have to do to get that line of yours back, let's take a clean paintbrush, not one that's already soaked with purple, and put some alcohol in it. Take that brush and come back and paint over where you don't want it to be and pick it up. So you can erase it, but if you've already taken time to get all this texture in your flower, or you know, the fur or the feathers in your animal, whatever you're doing, you don't want to undo what you've done. So that's why I do the background first. And if it leaves a little bit of a stain behind, it's probably because of your brush or the paper towel not being clean. You can actually take it back to white pretty easy, but see, my brush has got purple on it. And I'm not going to take the time to clean it right here, right now, because you know, I've got you guys for just a little bit here. I don't want to bore you. When it comes to texture for fur or that sort of thing, I do like to use markers for part of it. You can get kind of a fur looking thing going on with the markers, but you know, you can get them real small, but they still have a lot more ink in them, so they round out. If you're looking for a really sharp point, it's hard to do. And so I prefer to use a paintbrush, and I'll dip it in just a little bit of alcohol. And again, you want to dry brush this. So if it's too wet, it's gonna not give texture. It's just gonna kind of blob together. You can start off that way. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. It's gonna move it around, but you just keep going in until your brush is dry enough that you're just leaving little strokes, and just tap, tap, tap it. And you know, more up and down, more to the back, or you can even, once you've got it nice and dry, you can dry brush it. And oh my gosh, I have been doing this off camera. Okay, you can dry brush this after you've dabbed it. You can go over top of your marker even, if you don't want to put a big drop down. And you can get more ink, less ink, more alcohol, less alcohol. You can make the color brighter, darker, just by stippling over it, basically, make sure you don't use a good brush, because it's going to be hard on your brushes, but you can make all sorts of texture that way, and it'll behave just like acrylics or dry watercolor if you just give it a chance to dry out a little bit and use a dry brush, basically. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of ink here, and I'm kind of dry, or I'm kind of wet, so just keep moving it around until it's as dry as you want it to be. And then you're like you are with an acrylic or a watercolor. You can do fine lines. And back to the stippling. If you want to do a fur, you'll actually be able to see the brush strokes when you have it more dry. I don't know if you can see those or not. Hopefully you can. But it's that's how you get the really fine stuff, and that's how you get your textures in. Just going in with a brush that's got a little tiny bit of alcohol on it will do it. Or the color, since the colors are alcohol, you know, based, they have alcohol in them, they'll pick it up too. It's just a matter how big your line is, how much alcohol you have on your brush. If you have a lot, it's going to be a bigger line. If you have a little, it's going to be more controlled. Also, the fun thing about alcohol inks is that you can take a lighter color. If you forgot yourself and didn't plan out, like I always do, you can take a lighter color and go back over top of a darker color and actually have it show through. If you go really light, it's not going to show through a lot. It's just going to be a darker color on top. Oh gosh, it's going to make a liar out of me. If you just barely touch it, it's going to be darker, but if you want it to cut down through that ink, you can push down and you'll have that alcohol help pick up some of that color underneath. Again, that's how much alcohol determines how much it's going to pick up, how much it's going to spread, how your line's going to be. And make sure you clean your brush between, otherwise you're going to have it bleed through a lot for another color. But see, if I do it really wet here, it'll blend together. If I do it not quite so wet, just kind of touch it, then I can do a thin line instead of having this big thing. So it's all about how much moisture you have and the size of your brush, how much ink's there, you know, a million factors. But there's so many options, and it doesn't matter. You're like, oh, I hate this. I can't believe I did that. This is horrible. Look at that big blob. I had too much ink. Oh, well, go ahead and reconstitute your purple again in your ink oil. I just don't want to take it off completely and totally off camera. I just put some ink on some purple already here. And then go back in. And just keep picking up purple and putting it back in and narrowing down that area once more. And you know, so it's, you can always erase it. That's about all I can think of. You can use your markers if you're more comfortable than dropping down the blobs of ink. It's all about what works for you. I like to use a real good combination of the both of them. I love using freezer paper because I started off with it and I was looking at the prices of all the different papers, and you know, it was a couple dollars a sheet, and that's kind of daunting when you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to do this. Am I going to screw this up? That's a big investment. So freezer paper, I had it on hand, and I got photo paper and it didn't work for me. I tried the brands I suggested, it just didn't work. Didn't move like I wanted it to. Freezer paper, it really moves. I love the freezer paper and the graphics the best, but the freezer paper I can do any size I want to. You know, at 18 inches wide by however long I want to go. So that gives me a little more freedom, and I like that. I take and I cover it with the Kamar varnish to seal it, do a couple coats on there, and then I'm trying a couple different things to see which makes the inks more light fast, because they're not very light fast. So I've got some covered in resin, I've got some covered in triple thick glaze, I've got a bunch of different things, so I'm going to see which way they go before I treat my big pieces. Then with I use a lot of blending solution and a lot of alcohol, so I just buy the cheap stuff. I mean, this is a couple bucks at Walmart, 91% isopropyl alcohol. And then for my blending solution, since the alcohol dries really fast and gives you harder edges, and the blending solution keeps it from drying as quickly. It's still going to dry pretty fast, but it's going to delay it. So this is a 2-ounce bottle, I believe. I fill that up with isopropyl alcohol, and then I add 2 drops of the vegetable glycerin that you can get at the Whole Foods store, pharmacies, that sort of thing. And that will make it so it dries less quickly. I like to use Q-tips. I like to use paintbrushes. It just depends on what I'm trying to get. With like the Q-tips, or this is a fantastic, it's basically a Q-tip that doesn't fall apart. I can make just like the coolest clouds, because, here, I'll zoom this in again. The nature of how it just keeps blending, I should be able to do layers of clouds ridiculously easy. You just keep all the strokes and the circles that you make in it kind of blend together, and the little bits of hints that are there just lend more to that cloud or smoke look. And you can see there, I had the strokes were visible for a little while, but they mostly just blend out. And I cannot do clouds in any other medium. I can't do it with graphite. I suck. I try so hard and I can't get it to happen. But with alcohol ink, it just kind of does it on its own. It's a blast. And the more pigment you have for the background, the better that effect works. Let's see here. Move it down so you can see a little better, and I'll ruin this flower here. And if you're seeing too many lines, just get more alcohol. And then those lines will fade. And you come back in, do another level, kind of overlapping it. And the way the alcohol likes to just create its own edge from the surface tension, it makes pretty cool looking little clouds without much, if any, effort at all, just swirling it. I found that out when I was trying to erase a mistake I made, and I had a lot of ink in a spot, and it just kept leaving that edge, and I started playing with it, and oh my gosh, I can actually do clouds. And you can come back in and, I mean, highlights, lowlights, that sort of thing, just like a cloud, you know, would have, and your brush marks and everything disappear with the alcohol, which is awesome. But if there's anything else that you guys are curious about or want to know about with detail work, something I can help with, drop me a question and I will do my best to answer it. If I don't know the answer, which is entirely possible because I'm new to this, I probably know somebody who does. Thank you.